Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is Hotcast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Go Iowa Awesome and Rivals.com. Before we get started today, make sure that you subscribe, leave a rate and review, head over to iowa.rivals.com/subscribe to get all the inside information from us, including me, recruiting analyst and host Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter. This week, Jake, I told myself I was going to ask you how to pronounce your last name before we got started, but Jake Kocorowski? God,
Kocorowski.
dang it. Kocorowski.
It's all good, man. It's all good.
From
my family, real quick. One, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate you making time for our podcast back at Big Ten Media Days, but also it's also fun too, because my last name can be said 15 million different ways. I say Kocorowski because Coco is easy. My great-grandfather had the name changed, and they tried to keep the same sound of the name. I'm like, no, there's no Coco and Kocorowski, so we're going to call it Kocorowski from now on. And welcome to my life as a Polish American. It's always good times.
Wow. Yeah. Before, I don't know if you caught it, and maybe I explained it at Big Ten Media Days, but do you know how to pronounce my last name?
Yeah, Clough, like rough.
Okay. All right. Like rough and tough. Yes,
rough
you got
tough.
it.
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. You read the Twitter bio, I can see. But Jake from the Wisconsin State Journal, previously of Rivals and Badger Blitz, but Jake joining us to preview this Iowa-Wisconsin game coming up here this weekend. Last week, we previewed that Purdue game with Dub Jellison from Boiler Upload, and obviously, very different situation. Wisconsin, a better football team, but kind of similar scenario. New coach, new quarterback, a lot of new in Madison this year. The Badgers are 4-1, so I imagine you can't be too upset about how things are going if you're a Badgers fan. Jake, has the team embraced like the Luke Fickell way of how they do things? Do you see the culture starting to set in? Like, what have you seen from this new face of this program this offseason and into the season?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question because, very much established players love Paul Chryst. They love Jim Leonard. And then, a lot of us thought, you never heard the name Luke Fickell being associated with the Wisconsin job until that morning that it hit, that they were zeroing in on Luke Fickell. I think that's how Pete Thamel had called it or whatnot. So really, though, the team has embraced it, embraced Luke Fickell and the new staff and the new strength and conditioning staff. And on top of that, too, it's, Luke was talking about, the culture is there already, and whatnot. So it's not like they're trying to overhaul the culture, and on top of that, too, the players on paper, look at the Rivals, you being a Rivals alum like I am, I have of course, a bias towards liking Rivals and whatnot, but it's a thing where you have from the class of 2019 to 2021, those were the best recruiting classes on paper, according to Rivals, in the Rivals era. And so you had supposed talent there. If you believe in star rankings and in recruiting evaluations, which I do, and of course you're going to have some diamonds in the rough, but like Wisconsin's walk-on program is one of those. But even with the recruiting, what's this day and age, it's harder to find those diamonds in the rough because they all have huddle film, but I digress. Wisconsin, for really with the, what they've done, the new, the players that were there previously from the old regime have bought in. On top of that, they have brought in transfers. I think it was like 14 or 15 scholarship transfers into this program too, that, to fill certain places. Quarterback, they brought in 3 quarterbacks from, all from, by the way, the state of Texas, and whatnot. And that includes Tanner Mordecai. You mentioned a new quarterback there. You have, wide receivers. They brought in 4 wide receivers, and 2 of them are starting now. You can count a third if you include CJ Williams there, depending upon how they arrange their wide receiver rotation. And offensive line too. And, they've plugged in nickelback with the slot back with Jason Maitre, the Boston College transfer. So they've plugged holes where they've needed to, but they also, Luke Fickell's talked about, they want to be a developmental system within, and grab high school recruits and not just depend upon the transfer portal. And he said that during his opening press conference. So I still anticipate that they had to, in their eyes, bring in guys, but there's been a gelling. between everybody. And yeah, you had Keontae Lewis depart a few games into the season and announce his intentions to enter the transfer portal when that opens up. But it's a team that's bought in. And you're seeing, there's always, I guess, with a team overall. I mean, that's culture's part of it. So like that part they've bought in. It's still interesting to see how schematically how they're evolving. And even Luke Fickle had mentioned, but today, or was it today, Monday, that he feels that the Badgers had to evolve more defensively than offensively. And that's interesting because they wanted to try to mesh the elite of. That's how Jim Tressel coined the phrase, or a paraphrase in it, meshing the elite or mesh the elite, of what Jim Leonard did with the defense in terms of run defense and stopping the run. And Iowa has seen that happen over the course of the, outside of, I think, 2020, that season. But with what Cincinnati did against the pass, when, with Mike Tressel's kind of 3-3-5 unit. And so that part, they're still figuring things out, I think, what they can do with the personnel they have now, what suits them best, defensively, but also offensively. It's funny. I was just on another podcast and I have joked about this, where on paper, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Because if you look at the Big Ten standing, or, the rushing standings, Wisconsin's first in the Big Ten in rushing yards per game. You're like, wait, didn't they go to an air raid scheme? But that has opened up, spacing out more. No more 8 or 9 guys in the box, and you have you have a running game that's able to, you have a lineman that don't have to worry about 2 to 3 other defenders, and you have the ability to spread it out more. So, I mean, long story short, too long didn't read. Culture wise, they've gelled, they've bought in. On the field, they're still working through what's working, what's going to work best for them. And the air raid scheme is installed. The players are playing more instinctively, but now they're going to get a big test against an Iowa team that is just, especially with a defense that is very stout and does things very well for what they're being asked to do. On top of that, you got some gnarly weather conditions coming up on Saturday.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the run game. You mentioned the air raid. All things I'm definitely interested in here. One stat that sticks out when you look at this Wisconsin offense, especially considering the fact that they bring in that air raid system and that's what they're going to be running, is that Tanner Mordecai has 3 passing touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and the run game, they've got 15 touchdowns on the ground. What's going on there? Are they using the air raid between the 20s and then pounding the run game, in the red zone? What's going on?
It's interesting because the numbers are deceiving, and it's one thing we've had discussions about, and Colton wrote about this after the game, the win against Rutgers, and we even said it on our podcast during the bye week. Tanner Mordecai's numbers are deceiving because he means so much to this offense. The numbers don't do him justice. 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, averaging about 204 yards per game through the air. Good completions percentage of about 64% in terms of hitting on his throws. But he's also doing stuff with his feet. Let me just make sure I got my numbers right here. I mean, yeah, only 152 yards, but he's averaging, even with sacks, 3.2 yards per carry, and he has 4 rushing scores. So he's been able to provide a dual threat look. I mean, there are RPOs that are being run. And yeah, Paul Chris maybe integrated here and there more towards the end of his regime at Wisconsin, his time at Wisconsin. But, they utilize run pass options very well within that offense. Tanner Mordecai is a threat out of the backfield to run the ball. Is he the best athlete in that quarterback room? No. But can he make guys miss and get to the second levels of the defense to get some first downs where needed, or scramble to make 3rd and shorts? Absolutely. That's on top of having Braelen Allen. And yeah, Ches Malusi is, we never confirmed that he was going to be out for the season. I know Adam Rittenberg had that, talking about the lower leg injury that was going to cost Malusi. That was we've never been able to confirm that, but he's not on the depth chart. And he hasn't been on the depth chart for the past, 2 weeks. So, since that injury, but, Jackson Acker, Braelen Allen, those 2 guys, they're both power backs. And even Acker was joking with reporters after the game, he said that both him and Braelen went to Phil Longo and said, "Hey, did you ever have 2 power backs in your air raid scheme?" And he said, "No." And so so you have that. So they're not going to go away from, and that's what one thing Phil Longo said, even at his introductory news conference, or I don't know what to call that, availability back in January, that he can mold personnel. He may be air raid, but he works with what they have. So, and that's going to be big because you have a 2-time consensus second team all Big Ten back in Braelen Allen. You have Jackson Acker, who is an athlete. He was a fullback last year, but really his best position is just being a bigger tailback, and he's physical. You have those guys, and then you have a receiving core that there was talent coming in even before the transfers, the 4 wide receiver transfers, where Chimere Dike, I think, has been an unsung hero within the offense, and he's Mr. Reliable at that wide receiver group. And then you also have, along with that, now you have Will Pauling and Skylar Bell in the slot, and a couple things in terms of like what's happening with the passing game. A lot of short passes, those act like pseudo runs too. But it's also spaced out defenses that's helped the run game, where there's no longer 8 or 9 guys in the box. Wisconsin's probably going to try to run because they have Braelen Allen and whatnot. But that short passing game with Will Pauling can make a big deal in the slot, or they can go to Chim Dike, on the outside, or CJ Williams or Bryson Green. Bryson Green led Oklahoma State last year in touchdown receptions with 5, and he's a big deep ball guy. Will that happen against Iowa and Cooper DeJean with the conditions? That's going to be one question to ask, is just where they're going to line up DeJean and just how are they going to try to combat this? But if the weather's going to be bad with swirling winds and rain, is it going to matter? That's going to be a question that needs to be answered on Saturday. But I think they're still waiting on those deep throws. The offense, again, when it played against Purdue, got off to a really hot start, and a needed hot start, because they were kind of, during the first 3 games, were sputtering early on, and they kicked it up a notch later in the game for the first 3 contests. But you saw them really almost hit on all cylinders outside of 3 field goals. I think it was all 3 were near or around the red zone and whatnot. But now, that's one thing, is like with the deep passes, they want to hit deep, but it's probably a combination of execution, but also what the defenses are giving and not trying to allow those deep passes. They've had opportunities, and not to pick on Skylar Bell, I feel like I've always called him out in whatever podcast whoever I'm talking to, but there's one pass against Buffalo where it should have been a 60-yard touchdown, and he dropped it like out of the blue. One of those easy ones, should catch it, split the defensive backs, drops it. 2 plays later, Mordecai throws an interception. There's a pass against Purdue where could have caught it, taken it likely to the house, didn't come up with it. It was a tough catch. Let me just say that. It was like over the shoulder, real difficult, but it was there in his hands. So there's that type of things where a little bit of execution goes a long way. And if they make, if those 2 completions hit, we're talking maybe a little bit different story. But they're still working through things with the passing game, but they're playing more instinctively. You're seeing the potential is there. Will we see it on Saturday? Like I said, I hate repeating myself, but the conditions are going to be bad, likely forecasted to be bad. I don't know if you'll see it against Iowa, but they are making progress, and it's a lot more potent, that passing game, this year than what it has been in years past. And that's also, they don't come back against Washington State, that second game of the year, if not for Tanner Mordecai in that passing game where he just started chucking it and got into a rhythm. And that's, late in the first half, early going into the second half, especially that third quarter. And they don't make that type of comeback, even though they faltered and lost late. They don't make that comeback without Mordecai.
2 things. First, we were just talking before this, as you're an employee of the Wisconsin State Journal. I'm a former sports assistant in the Wisconsin State Journal. While I was there, I wrote a feature on Jackson Acker. So small world. He quite the athlete out of Verona, correct?
You betcha.
Yes. Yeah. He's a ridiculous discus thrower. That's why I wrote the feature on him. So an athlete in a variety of ways. But when we're talking about the offense and the way they operate, do you think that, I guess, when you mentioned Mordecai, he obviously could run the ball. There's a difference between a quarterback that can run the ball and a quarterback that's dual threat. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I think.
Would you say he's dual threat?
Yeah, that's interesting because within, especially with this type of offense, if you have a quarterback that can do both, you know, it can make such a big difference. And it adds, like, it just changes the numbers games for defenses where you're not just, okay, this guy's sitting in the pocket. Okay, he's just gonna stay there. If he gets 4 yards, that's a moral victory for the offense, type of stuff. Mordecai is always going to be a pass first quarterback. He's always going to pass first, looking to pass, but he's also able to take off and just when he needs to, if nothing's open, pockets collapsing, he'll go. So I think he has a dual threat nature. Is he a true dual threat quarterback? Uh, you know, I don't think so, but he's able to make plays with his feet. And that's what you need. He'll stand in the pocket. He can make every throw that you want out of a good Power 5 quarterback, one that has to play in a Power 5 conference like the Big Ten. But he can, like the RPOs, like he has 4 rushing touchdowns in the year, and he's been able to make plays with his feet and scramble, and it's made defenses pay even with good coverage. Well, you lost your block, you lost your lane in pass rush. Well, he's going to take off for it and he's going to gain 5-6 yards. That could set up a closer third down, or he'll move the chains. And just when you think you have him, he'll do that. He'll make you miss and make you pay there. So, and it's interesting because there are other player, on the roster for Wisconsin in terms of quarterbacks. The best athlete in that quarterback room is Nick Evers. He's an Oklahoma transfer, former 4-star kid, played at Oklahoma for the first year. He has the strongest arm, and he's got the wheels to take the offense. Once he learns that offense, and if he's able to learn it and digest it further, he could take the offense to a whole different level. In my eyes, that's my opinion, my 2 cents. But Mordecai's mastered this type of the air raid, what they're looking for this year under Longo, and he can do so much. But back to your question, I think he is a pass first quarterback, but he can beat you with your feet when he absolutely needs to. And they have run RPOs where he's able to make that right read and do that. And even with that, looking for it, the signing, the 2024 class, I know talking rivals, recruiting's big. They have a 4-star quarterback, top 200 kid, and Mabry Matoyer. I went to go down and watch him during the bye week. So I had no week off. I was that, there was no, I did do some, pumpkin patching just east of Madison the day after. I was tired as all heck getting back from Houston, but Matoyer is a 6'5", 6'6", 225-pound kid that, opposing coaches, when I talked to him down in Texas, said that he was a dual threat quarterback, in terms of Matoyer. And he may not look like it, but he can make those dual threat type of plays where they can use him in the run game. Almost like they didn't call him like a freeze tag player is what his coach called him. Like he's a big, like he runs like a big tight end, but he's big and he can make those type of runs that, you get blockers out in front of you, he's going to pick up some substantial yards and he's hard to take down. Back to Mordecai, he's not as big as a 6'6" kid, but he can still make plays. And like within this offense, he can make plays with his feet, and that just helps take that offense to a whole new level for Wisconsin.
Gotta flip things to Iowa's offense, Wisconsin's defense. The name Deacon Hill. That's been a huge conversation this week about former Wisconsin Badger transfer, ended up at Iowa. Now he's the starter for this game in Madison. I have to think some of the guys that were around this last year have seen him. Do you think they're kind of licking their chops going into this game, especially after the 6 of 21 performance? On what, one point in time, had a passer rating of 1 during that game, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, a lot of overthrown balls. Like, what are you thinking going to this game? Do you think Wisconsin's defense is going to be in full attack mode, pin the ears back and go?
I think it's going to be one thing where obviously with Caleb Johnson, and if I'm not mistaken, he's going to be good to go for this week, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, the first things first to get with Iowa, you shut down the run. And that's, that's a Jim Leonard MO, but it's going to be with just any type of Wisconsin Iowa matchup. You will want to shut down the run, opponent's run game, and then make make the opponent beat you through the air. And with Hill, his first two appearances in terms of substantial in-game playing time, Michigan State. I was watching up in the plane. Shout out to American Airlines and free Wi-Fi because I have T-Mobile. But watching Deacon Hill throw, and then you see what he did last week. You want, and for that matter, I know that stat's been going around every other podcast or Iowa's wide receivers. How many catches did they have last week? 0. I think Split Zone Zoo said that, in their podcast this week when I listened to them. So you have those guys, like you zero in on Eric All, who obviously had a great year for, as a tight end. And I know Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl called him out yesterday for what he's done. So yeah, you're going to want to have Deacon Hill try to make you beat them. And, the one thing too, I know for that matter too, Colton Bartholomew, my tag team partner on the Wisconsin State Journal / Badger Extra. That's our premium service. We call it Badger Extra. It's really confusing when we say Badger Extra or Badger Blitz. I get those screwed up and I get yelled at. But for Badger Extra, like we're going to have basically talking, Hill's former teammates talking about, about that very topic, about what are you going to look for? And, I think from what Colton has told me, they said they've seen some development from Deacon Hill. The one thing that always stands out about Hill is his arm, right? I mean, that we saw it. I wrote an article for Badger Blitz talking about Deacon Hill and what he did with the scout team, where he's airing out. I mean, they talked about one throw. I remember, I forgot who, I think it might have been Tyler Beach, the former offensive lineman, one of the two, but a couple guys mentioned, Tyler, or was it Deacon Hill, rolled out to his left during like one bowl prep practice. I think it was in 21, and just aired it out 60 yards easily to Marcus Allen, who's also no longer in the program. And, you hear about that. And obviously, he's a bigger body quarterback, mobile, he may not be obviously dual threat at all, but, if they can pin back the ears, like you said, like if they can force Iowa's run game to go into second and third and longs and then pin their ears back and send some blitzes. And if Hill doesn't trust the wide receivers or others, that could be a very long, long day. And so that's going to be the key. Can they stop the run game, force those third and longs, and then, crash down and make them play, create some turnovers? Because, again, in these conditions, slippery ball, potentially a ball hung up in the air. If there's going to be a quarterback that's going to try to throw into the wind that I would want to try to throw into the wind, it would be Deacon Hill's arm, right? So we'll see how that fares. That's going to be fun to watch. But, yeah, if I was Wisconsin, though, you stop the run and you make Deacon Hill beat you.
I'm not sure if you've seen the video or I guess it wasn't a video, but a tweet that I put out last week. I went like viral with Iowa Twitter. He said the longest he remembers throwing the ball is 73 or 74 yards. I'm sure that doesn't really surprise you because the dude can launch it. I was telling my girlfriend about it, and I said, I think the longest I've ever thrown a football is 45 yards.
Right.
And granted, I'm significantly smaller than Deacon Hill, but still.
Yeah, I'm 5'10", and I say 5/8 because I will milk every quarter inch or every eighth of an inch for the life of me. And I'm also substantially heavier than I was in high school, but I was a JV quarterback that threw more interceptions than completions because I didn't have contacts or corrective lenses. So if I was able to throw it 30 to 40 yards back then as like a 5'8", 5'9" kid running the wing T, that was a moral victory. I don't care if it was intercepted. I don't care if it was like a duck up in the air down in Southwest Florida. I was just happy that I got it that far. But yeah, his arm, we've seen it before, and the key with Deacon is just, like it's the taming of it, right? Where we all know about the one thing I'll watch on Saturday, it's hard to even say on Saturday because again, and I hate going back to the conditions, but they play such a vital role in terms of how the ball comes off the hands, the fingers, what could affect that. But, I want to see how has his touch passes looked? Is there a finesse to him now? Oh. And so,
I can tell you that definitively. No. No.
And like I said, and on top of that, I've talked to Deacon when he was a recruit, because he was recruited by John Budmeyer at Wisconsin, who obviously now is a special assistant to Kirk Ferentz. I think hopefully I got that right in terms of title, but John's got roots. John's a former Wisconsin quarterback, and Budmeyer, obviously was the quarterbacks coach at Wisconsin before he went on to Colorado State in 2021. And but with Deacon, so I've gotten to talk with Deacon before, and you always wish a kid well going on somewhere if they're just not fit anymore, and so it'll be interesting to see just how he looks back in a type of homecoming type of, I wouldn't, maybe I shouldn't call it a homecoming type of environment, but just an environment somewhere where he called home for a couple of years.
Now, you talk about forcing turnovers. Obviously, with the conditions, that's going to be a big part of it. But 8 picks through 5 games for the Wisconsin defense, 4 for Ricardo Hallman. Is that a byproduct of pass rush level of competition, good secondary play, deflections? What are we talking here? A mixture?
Yeah, they have that was about 8 interceptions. I think they're tied for the Big Ten lead with, I forgot, Maryland and I think maybe Minnesota. Does that sound right? Right now, the days are. I think I'm right around there. Yeah, they are tied with Minnesota and Maryland with 8 interceptions on the year. Wisconsin is for the Big Ten lead, and it just is with someone like Ricardo Hallman. He was a ball hawk. I remember watching him when I was working at Badger Blitz and looking at his junior film and being like, "The kid's a ball hawk. This is what this defense needs." The cornerbacks. Jim Leonard. It's interesting to see just how. I would say it's the scheme a little bit where, like that 95-yard pick six, they're kind of in a form of a zone. I think they call it bracketing, if I'm not mistaken. And you just watched Gavin Wimsett throw it, and you're just kind of watching him. You're like, yeah, that's going to be an interception. You saw it right off the bat where he just followed it and caught it, brought it down, and he went for 95 yards thereafter. But he has, that's my dog in the background for those that are wondering about this, the sound. So I apologize. But you have, with what this defense with Mike Tressel's done, they obviously Mike Tressel, in the Cincinnati defense overall, Sauce Gardner is the big name, Kobe Bryant, 2 NFL bound cornerbacks that were from Cincinnati. Was it Brian Cook, a safety, within the Bearcats defense, went to the Kansas City Chiefs. So, I think it's a combination of talent that they've had, that Wisconsin has within that secondary and the defense overall. Cause Hunter Wohlers also has a couple of interceptions. I think they both came in the same game, if I'm not mistaken. Again, the weeks are blurring for me right now, but yeah, this is a fact that this team has, Coleman's just been, he had a really bad game against Michigan State last year where he gave up a couple touchdowns at the very least, some big plays to Michigan State in an overtime loss, including the game winner. You look at Pro Football Focus, his reps went down the rest of the regular season until the bowl game. In the spring, ball hawk. At least, I think he might have had 3, he had multiple interceptions in they call it the launch or the spring of the game. It wasn't a spring game, but it was a spring event that fans could attend, but he made interceptions before that too. And so he's just risen up, and yeah, it's a combination of scheme, but also them being able to utilize the talent and seeing what's in front of, what's in front of them on the roster, and then putting them in places where they know that they can make plays. And, Hallman definitely, is one of the bright spots in the defense. It's still evolving, and even, like I said, Luke Fickell had said earlier this week that he felt that he feels that the Badgers have had to evolve more defensively than offensively this year.
Now, as we start to wrap things up here at the end of this episode of Hotcast, one thing that I want to hit on, we talked about all these really strong things about Wisconsin. Where have their weaknesses come this year? Where are the weak points that Iowa can tackle or attack, or will be focusing on this week when they're looking at film?
It's going to be interesting to see just how, Wisconsin at times has beat itself with penalties. Again, granted, it was against Purdue and they came out with a big win, but they had like a team high 11 penalties pre-snap. I think 5 of them were against the offensive line, if I'm not mistaken. So that's something to watch. Just how are they going to, and they cleaned up very well against Rutgers for that matter. I think they have only 1 or a couple penalties, if I'm not mistaken. So it was a lot better than the 11 before the bye week. Run defense, before Rutgers, like that was a concern. You give up almost, I think if I'm not mistaken, almost 200 yards to Purdue. Within that, yeah, it was 194 yards on only 31 carries. That's over 6 yards per touch in the run game. And they had given up 122 to Buffalo, but it was only on 4 yards a clip there. So it wasn't overly bad. But there's been times too where, like on off the edge, if backs can get the edge or if they get reverses off the I haven't really seen too much in terms of them defending the reverses, but just running backs getting to the edge. That's going to be something to watch. Just can Wisconsin contain that edge? And they were in a different kind of a personnel at that time too, where we saw some things, but I still think they can do a little bit better job. If Iowa can get to the edge in the run game, that's going to be something to watch. Offensively, it's really, in my eyes, it's also not just penalties, like the pre-snap stuff that puts you, especially in a game that could be decided with the elements. Turnovers is protecting the ball. With that Washington State game, Wisconsin had 3 turnovers, and they didn't force any, and that's a recipe for disaster when on the road. So they've cleaned up their turnovers very well in the past few weeks, for that matters. But you can't have you have to protect Tanner Mordecai, because 2 of those 3 were blindside hits by an all Pac-12 defensive lineman and Ron Stone Jr. that Mordecai didn't have enough time to tuck it in. Like one of them went for a touchdown. So I think those are a couple of areas. I think I'm just trying to think if there's anything else really that stands out, because the offense is still a work in progress, just figuring out the passing game in terms of evolving and trying to hit deep passes or trying to hit this the shorter passes. Run game, if they can get things going with that run game and get the power run game going against the Iowa unit that I know is, again, normally stout even without a couple of key players from last year, that's going to go a long way. But even special teams, special teams has decided you can't. And Atticus Bertrams, who's an Australian punter who came in after the spring, and he's locked in the number 1 punter position. He's looked pretty good. A little bit of shaky start against Buffalo. I think his first ever football game, like college American football game. I think he played rugby overseas along with and whatnot. But when you have a potential returner like Cooper DeJean back there, how do you defend against him? Special teams, the flipping of the fields could be. We saw it happen last year where DeJean took that nice punt return at the end of the third quarter, turned into a touchdown thereafter. Iowa's third touchdown, which basically put the game away. So what can they do there? And on top of that, the kickoffs for Wisconsin, they've had 4 kickoffs go out of bounds this year already, out of 5 games, which is, you can't have that and whatnot. So the one thing with kickoffs, right? Will Iowa's offense be able to take advantage of the ball at the 35-yard line? That's the next question to be asked after that. But any offense, you give them an extra 10, 15 yards after a kickoff, that just helps them out. So field position is going to be huge. And I think Wisconsin special teams have done a better job, but anytime you have someone like Cooper DeJean back there, that's a game changer in the return game. You got to one, respect it, and 2, scheme very well to make sure that does not, any type of return is negligible, or they nullify it somehow in terms of how they prepare their scheme.
Spread last time I checked was Badgers -10. What are you thinking? Expectations for this game? Do you think it's close? Do you think that spread is fair? Where are you at going into this one on Saturday?
I'm trying to figure out how they get 10 points, because the way that I don't know if Vegas doesn't take into account weather conditions, and I hate beating that with a drum, but like when you have potential 15 to weather.com had put this like 15 to 25 mile per hour winds, periods of rain, potential higher gusts. It's going to come down to who wins in the trenches. I think it'll be less than 10. I could see it, but I could see it being a 20-10 game or a 17-7 game. I do have Wisconsin. I figured it out in my head today. I think Wisconsin will win 17-10. It could be 17-13 for that matter, or it could be 17-7. But I think it'll be within a score But yeah, it's going to have to come down to whoever plays cleanest, who has the least amount of turnovers. And like every Wisconsin Iowa game, no matter what type of air raid system that Wisconsin will deploy, or whatever change in offense, who's going to win the line of scrimmage? And that's going to come out. That's who's going to decide who brings home the Heartland Trophy. And really, honestly, Elliot, it's a game that really is, in my eyes, unless one or both teams decide to fall off a cliff in the Big Ten West, which I wouldn't put it past, just because the way the Big Ten West has been. I mean, they're in the driver's seat for a Big Ten West division channel, the last Big Ten West division championship before they go to a divisionless format in the conference starting next year.
So do you have a final score prediction, or are you just
I'll
kind
say
of around
17-10.
that?
I'll say 17-10 with Wisconsin right now. I don't. First to 17, first to 20 will win this game. Unless like you see the skies part like the Red Sea, and next thing you know, they're airing it out for, you see Deacon Hill and Tanner Mordecai just airing it out for days, which that'd be hilarious. And I would go over to you and like nudge you and be like, hey, this happened in the press box,
right.
But I don't foresee that happening.
With what I've seen with specifically from Iowa, this is a Wisconsin victory. Right now I'm at 17-7. So right on that spread mark. If the weather isn't as bad as it turns out to not be quite as bad, then I'd probably make that spread larger and say Badgers win like 27-6 or 27-7.
Oh, wow.
And that's
okay.
largely, I don't know how much film you've been able to watch of Iowa, but my mind immediately goes back to that Penn State game where the Iowa offense barely touched the ball. And it's just that bit by bit, death by 1,000 cuts from the offense. And then all of a sudden, or by the Badgers offense, and then the second half, it blows up. It's 31-0 after being 10-0 at half.
Right. Well, I mean, I remember looking at those stats, and again, I heard the stat from the Split Zone Duo guys on their podcast. I looked back to check. I mean, Iowa only gave up 4.1 yards per play in that 31-0 win. So it wasn't like the defense, the score, but was a blowout, but it wasn't like Iowa was giving up 8 or 9 yards a play. It was. And so, if Wisconsin can get that going with if short passes, if the Badgers don't drop passes when there's opportunities to throw it. And again, turnovers play a role. I mean, that in shorter fields, it's going to be key. It's hard too, because even with like the Ches Malusi injury where, Allen and Malusi were able to complement each other. Acker and Allen are very much more similar backs. I think actually Aker's a little bit better of a receiver out of the backfield right now, with his route running in his hands. But it will be just, who wears down who, and just, is it going to be punts back and forth? Or are you going to see that throughout the game? And obviously Torrey Taylor's among the best, not just in the Big Ten, but the nation. So if somehow there's clearing, that'll be really interesting. But Wisconsin, things are on paper for Wisconsin where they could be a really good team. With the transition, and that's one thing that we've even talked about it. I know I'm rambling, so I apologize everybody listening, but it's one of those things where we thought that there's talent on paper for Wisconsin, just like how quickly can they adjust? And what we saw in the spring and even in fall camp, you're like, oh gosh, they're making these transitions quickly. But then you get to the game, and that's when, obviously you play against, one another in terms of Badger on Badgers. Okay. You see things like, oh gosh, this is going quicker, but then you have an actual opponent. They're, probably should have given a little bit more feeler out, give it some time to things to coalesce and gel better. Against Purdue, I thought they did that offensively. Now it's going to be interesting to see just how it goes for the rest of the year, and just, and whatnot. But I think Wisconsin has that opportunity to be a good team, a really good, good to really good team this year. And Iowa will test them coming up.
Stay tuned on iowa.rivals.com for more preview stuff as we head towards this game this weekend. We will wrap it up here with Jake Kocorowski from the Wisconsin State Journal. Go follow him on Twitter. It's at Jake Coco there. We appreciate you tuning in to this episode of Hotcast, brought to you by iowa.rivals.com. If you're not a premium subscriber yet, You can do that today at iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube. Drop that like, a comment. What are you thinking about this game going into Madison this weekend? And don't forget to subscribe, leave a rate and review wherever you're listening. That helps us out a lot, and it makes us very happy. For now, we'll see you next time.